Today I'm speaking with Professor Michael Behe, who currently serves as professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. He's the leading voice of the intelligent design community, and he's also a fellow at the Discovery Institute. And Professor Behe, it's an honor to welcome you tonight to Christian Thinker Society. I was recently in Oxford, where you had your United Kingdom tour that was quite phenomenal, and I look forward to asking you about that. You gave lectures in London, Glasgow, Belfast, Bournemouth, Leamington, Warwick, Cambridge. You held a day conference, as far as when I was there, I think it was during the day, in Oxford. The theme of your tour was Darwin or Design, What Does the Science Really Say? And it was just a phenomenal tour, and I'm excited to hear you talk about that. Professor Behe, I would say you're probably best known in the popular world for your argument for irreducible complexity, which I look forward to asking you about as well. Professor Behe, you've also testified in several court cases and hearings on intelligent design, and even here in the great state of Kansas in Topeka. Professor Behe, you earned your PhD in biochemistry at the University of Pennsylvania, and you're known throughout the world for your articles, books, and lectures advocating intelligent design. I want to just kind of ask, at a basic foundational level for our audience who may not be as familiar, what is intelligent design? Can you define it for us? And is intelligent design science?
Okay, intelligent design, you can define it various ways, but a good way is the idea that some things in nature are better explained as the result of an intelligent agent or intelligent action rather than the undirected forces and accidents of nature. And a good example from our everyday world is Mount Rushmore. If you go out hiking in the woods and you were hiking along and looking at various mountains, you might think they were developed by natural laws, but if you hiked past Mount Rushmore, you would immediately realize that that is not well explained as the result of tectonics or volcanoes or natural activities. It's the result of intelligent design.
Would you say that intelligent design is a science, then?
Yes. Science or intelligent design, in my view, is completely scientific, even though it may have philosophical, even theological overtones. And the reason is that it depends completely on the empirical evidence, like Mount Rushmore, these stones that you have in front of you that you're observing, and on basic logic. What is the explanation for this stone formation? It's not based on, what does a, holy book say. It's not based on what a prophet said. It starts with the data of nature and then reasons from that and comes to a conclusion, which is pretty much how science is defined.
And so based on that definition, Professor Behe, should intelligent design be taught alongside evolution in the classroom?
Well, that's a good question, and I would say certainly in private and Christian schools, which are open to all ideas, then it certainly should. The arguments for it, against it, the arguments for other theories of life could be taught as well. But it gets to be a kind of a political mess when you start talking about public schools, because in the United States, at least, public schools are not supposed to endorse religion. Now, as I said, intelligent design is science, but people on the other side don't agree, or at least they argue against that. They say it's just religion in disguise, just an attempt to get the Bible taught in science class and so on. And people can get very, very emotional about it. So the official position of the Discovery Institute is that intelligent design, they are not asking for intelligent design to be taught in schools because it causes so much emotion, but rather just teach the majority theory, Darwinian evolution, the theory that's accepted by the majority of biologists, but also teach it warts and all, teach it with its difficulties, with its flaws, with the things it can't explain or is having a problem explaining, as well as the things that it can explain.
Now, you just touched on the Discovery Institute. For our audience here at Christian Thinker Society that may not be aware of Discovery Institute, you're obviously a fellow. Can you just explain what is the Discovery Institute?
It's a think tank based in Seattle, and it was actually established in the early 1990s to think about regional political issues for the Northwest. But its president, Bruce Chapman, became interested in the intelligent design issue when he read that a scientist named Dean Kenyon, who was involved in origin of life studies, had changed his mind and had become an intelligent design advocate. And he was being essentially persecuted at his school, San Francisco State University, and was removed from teaching biology because his views had changed based on the evidence. And Bruce Chapman thought that was an outrage in the United States, and so he formed within the Discovery Institute a program to help defend academics who are convinced of intelligent design and want to teach it.
And, I mean, let's talk about the treatment of these professors, because our church was a part of the pre-screenings of the movie Expelled, the documentary, and we were a huge advocate of that to get the word out a few years ago. And, I mean, that was a real eye-opener for me. I had no idea that professors were being singled out, accosted, persecuted, losing tenure. Are these things still happening? Is it worse than what we saw? Tell us about just the treatment, and you said just from simply following the evidence.
Not even that. All you have to do is make some sympathetic noise to intelligent design, or sympathetic noises that intelligent design should be allowed to make a case for itself, and that's enough to get you in trouble in some circles. There was a man named Rob. Now I'm forgetting. Richard Van Sternberg. Rich Sternberg, who was at the Natural History Museum in Washington, in the Smithsonian, and he, as part of his duties, was the editor for a small journal that the Smithsonian puts out, and he received as a submission a paper that argued for intelligent design, and he sent it out to be refereed, as all scientific papers are, and it came back, and the referees asked for some changes, which were made, and then they eventually approved it, and he then had it published in the Smithsonian's journal. And after it came out, there was an uproar, and scientists from all over the world, Nature and Science, the leading science journals, sent reporters to interview him. Not only that, his background was investigated. His files were gone through. His laboratory was closed. It's really bizarre. And he was not even an intelligent design advocate. He was just allowed this paper to be published. And yeah, there are many other stories of similar people who have tried to simply make the case, and it reminds me of the old Soviet Union, that if you question communism, then by definition you're mentally unstable. It's the same thing. If you argue for intelligent design, by itself, that shows you're not qualified to be a scientist. You should be driven out of science because you're corrupting children or some such thing.
You know, and I don't know why this surprises me, because, you know, pastors, I don't care what field you're in, when you stand up for truth, you make waves. And here's a man at the Smithsonian who submits an article, peer-reviewed journal, accepted by a group of respected scholars, and then is later nearly stoned for it. I mean, I don't know why it surprises me, but I want to get back to this subject. I want to get back to this before we close, because I know our audience has some more questions as well. But I want to just transition out to your world-famous work, your contribution, both many contributions in the scholarly area, but this contribution in the popular world that you made with your book, Darwin's Black Box. You present this scientific argument for the existence of God. Within the biochemistry of living cells, you argue that life is, quote, irreducibly complex.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by this term, irreducibly complex? And can you tell us why this book continues to be so influential in the science world and for students like myself and others who continue to read your work?
I think it's influential because that phrase, irreducible complexity or irreducibly complex, really encapsulates both the problem for Darwinism and also the evidence for intelligent design. Darwin always knew that his theory had to explain the development of organisms over long periods of time as small changes, tiny increments, tiny steps in improvement, and natural selection comes in and then selects the improved edition, and then another tiny change comes along after a long while. He always insisted on gradualism because he knew that if things improved rapidly in large leaps, then it would look suspiciously as if something other than randomness was involved. But some systems cannot be put together in small steps. And in my book, Darwin's Black Box, as an example from our everyday world, I talked about a mechanical mousetrap. If you think of it, the mousetrap that you buy at a grocery store or hardware store has a number of different parts. It's got a wooden platform generally. It's got a metal spring. It's got a little hammer which snaps shut and squashes the mouse. And it's got a couple other pieces as well. And if you take away one of those pieces, the trap isn't, less efficient than it used to be. It's broken. It doesn't work at all. So if you wanted to build up something like a mousetrap that needs a number of parts to work, by a Darwinian mechanism, by gradually improving it, it's very, very difficult to imagine how that can be. And it turns out, mousetraps are one thing, but what does biology show? Well, the more we have discovered about biology, especially in the past 50 years where we've discovered the molecular basis of life, which is the foundational level of life, we found that the cell is run by machines. They're literally molecular machines. There's little trucks and buses and outboard motors and so on. And if a simple machine like a mousetrap is difficult to put together by a gradual Darwinian process, then it's difficult in spades to imagine how these molecular machines could be put together. And in fact, if you look at the scientific literature, nobody ever actually explains how they do get together, except if you're lucky in the most broad hand-waving type of way, which is not rigorous science. On the other hand, whenever we see a machine which has a number of parts which act together to do something, we see what I've termed a purposeful arrangement of parts. And that is how we detect design, whenever we see different things fitted to each other to perform a purpose. Think of the mousetrap. Think of a computer. Think of any machine that you're familiar with. That's exactly how we detect design. We detected design in Mount Rushmore because the pieces of the rock were fitted with each other to perform a function, to show the images of the presidents of the United States. So not only is irreducible complexity a big problem for Darwin, but it's also a strong pointer to intelligent design, and it still gives many scientists conniptions. And if you read the literature, people are still publishing papers trying to debunk this idea of irreducible complexity.
And in my opinion, they have been unsuccessful in any kind of adequate response to Darwin's black box, because I mean, you're obviously onto something here. And I mean, do you see any future writings on this subject in the forthcoming days? I mean, is there any future research? I know we're going to get to your next book here in a moment. Was that a sequel to that in any kind of way, or do you see any sequels to Darwin's Black Box coming out in the future?
Well, yes, my second book was in fact a further development of the argument for irreducible complexity, and I've recently published a paper in the Quarterly Review of Biology investigating what do we know from experiments that Darwinian processes can do, and the short answer is not much. So yeah, there's lots more to be done, but I'm one person. And as a group, intelligent design folks are a small group, because if you are publicly identified as an ID proponent, you can kiss your career goodbye. So it helps to have tenure if you're going to declare yourself an intelligent design proponent. So we're working where progress is slow, but the problem is so juicy and so obvious that there's no doubt where the science will take us.
What is your support system? I mean, if you don't mind me asking a more personal question, because in this quest of following the evidence, I've read, you have been, people have come after you, and I'm one who is used to that in my field of biblical scholarship, doing debates, etc., saying things that aren't necessarily popular, but just simply following the evidence and responding to it, going against the status quo. What is your support system? I mean, you mentioned tenure, okay. How do you get through it, the really difficult times when you're being attacked for your views on intelligent design, and how are you able to transcend those?
Well, I drink heavily. No, just kidding. I have a beer every now and again. But no, I'm a Christian. I've been a Christian since I was a kid. I have a wonderful family, a wife, 9 children, who certainly give me other things to think about than just intelligent design. And there are many people in the Christian community and other communities too who are very supportive of this idea. So with the occasional email that I receive, occasional letter saying, go get them, I'm with you, and with the support of my family and with my own knowledge, when I see the attempted refutations, attempted attacks on intelligent design in scientific literature by the best scientists in the world, and see how lame essentially they are, how far from a real explanation they are, then I feel pretty good. It's nice to be loved by people in your field, but I'd rather work on a good problem and take trips with my family than worry about their opinions.
Wow. Well, in your recent book, I want to get to this next book, The Edge of Evolution, The Search for the Limits of Darwinism. I love that title. You define what evolution is capable of doing, but also what's beyond its scope. I hope I'm explaining that appropriately. In your lectures that I've personally heard, you use the example of malaria and the fact of cells breaking down, perhaps for survival, but not necessarily improvement. Can you please explain then, just for our audience, how is evolution defined? Just to step back for a moment. I know it's defined in different ways. But what did you find were the limits of evolution, and what was the ethos of this book, The Edge of Evolution?
Well, it's actually, I'm looking at Darwinian evolution. And as you say, evolution is defined in various ways, but full-blooded evolution, scientists mean Darwinian processes, which are undirected, unguided, unintelligent. Nobody planned them, most especially God did not plan them. And so it's chance plus natural selection, or chance plus some other unguided process. And so I, who am not convinced that explains all of life, said, well, what do we know that such chance processes Darwinian evolution can do. And it turns out that just in the past 10 years, a number of, because of advances in technology and advances in work by the scientific community, we've gotten a lot of results which bear directly on that question. And in order for Darwinian evolution to explain life, it has to explain those very elegant and complex, sophisticated molecular machines that science has discovered in the cell over the past 50 years. But when we look at experiments that mimic Darwinian evolution, we find nothing of the sort. And as you say in the book, I focus on malaria, and I actually focus on the two sides of malaria, as seen from the human side and as seen from the malarial parasites side. And, let me just stick to the human side here. In the past several thousands of years, malaria and humans have been at war with each other. People have lived in malarious areas, and if they get the disease, they have a good chance of dying. But if somebody were born with a mutation that could give them a slight immunity to malaria, then they'd have a better chance of surviving childhood and going on to raise children of their own. In the past several decades, due to advances in sequencing DNA, we've learned exactly what those mutations are. Resistance to malaria has always been pointed to by Darwinists as an example of evolution in action. Look what evolution can do. And it is evolution in action. It's Darwinian evolution in action. But it turns out that the random mutations and natural selection are breaking genes that were previously functional. They're degrading systems in the cell rather than improving them. And let me just give a kind of an analogy. Suppose you had a car, you had your car, and you wanted to race it, you wanted to go faster. So you wanted to decrease the wind resistance on your car. What's the fastest thing you could do to decrease wind resistance? Well, one thing you could do is break off the side view mirrors. You know, that decreases wind resistance. You don't have side view mirrors now, but maybe you don't care. You're just going to go in a straight line or something. Well, that's what the mutations have done in response to malaria. There's one mutation called the sickle cell mutation, which most people have heard of, and that can lead to sickle cell disease. And there's a handful of other mutations. One is called thalassemia, which essentially throws away part of the gene for hemoglobin. And for some odd reason, that gives resistance to malaria, because the malarial parasite actually lives in red blood cells where hemoglobin is found. But still, you're just throwing away something that was there. Another one is called glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, which is another gene which usually is important for the red blood cell, but is thrown away. And that helps a little bit in the fight against malaria. So it turns out that, you know, just as if you were in a sinking ship, it might help you to throw out sophisticated equipment overboard to lighten the ship. And that's what Darwinian evolution does. It can help by degrading what we've already got. And that's interesting, and it might be clinically important, but it is not the sort of process that can build up the complex systems we know about.
Again, I'm speaking with Professor Michael Behe at Lehigh University, the professor of biochemistry. You're watching Christian Thinker Society. This is just absolutely fantastic to be listening to. And I just want to switch gears again, and thank you for that excellent explanation. And again, I recommend our audience both The Edge of Evolution and Darwin's Black Box. If these are not a part of your library, go get them on Amazon.com. I encourage you to read them, reread them. It's certainly worthy of a second look if you've read it perhaps a few years ago. Great things, great evidence to talk about leading to intelligent design. Our church, First Family Church, as I said, hosted these pre-screenings of the Ben Stein documentary Expelled. And I just At Christian Thinker Society, our ethos here is to encourage Christians to become thinkers and thinkers to become Christians. And it's important that we just simply think through some of these issues. Why does this issue, Darwinian evolution versus intelligent design, why is it so hotly debated? Is it because of the implications? We start throwing around the term political. Why are these men taking these hits? I just want to drill down just a little bit deeper. What nerve is it touching that is so touchy, if you will? Why the nerve?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that it touches a nerve because it has implications beyond just science. It has philosophical, it has got theological implications, and so people don't see this just as another discovery, in science. This has implications for who we are, where we came from, and so on. And other theories in science have also faced resistance because they seem to have theological implications. One of them was the Big Bang theory. That many people forget that 100 years ago, most physicists thought that the universe was eternal and unchanging. And this was thought to be congenial to atheism, because an eternal universe might not need an explanation, might not need a creation. And then it was seen by astronomers that galaxies were rushing away from each other and from the Earth, and that was the beginning of the Big Bang, and the idea that the universe had a beginning in time, which was seen by many people, including many physicists, as suggesting a creation event, a creative event, and many scientists hated that idea, and they were very strongly opposed to it, simply because it had these extra scientific implications, not because of the data, not because it didn't fit the data, but because it suggested a reality beyond nature. And I think we're seeing the same thing here, but it's even closer to home, saying that you are made of molecular machines and other things that were purposely designed seems a whole lot closer than that the universe was, made in a Big Bang, billions of years ago. And a lot of people resist that, and the scientific community as a whole, kind of in a I don't want to say mob mentality, but a groupthink mentality, has decided that this should be banned from discussion.
And I mean, what is the kickback to that? Okay, so it's taboo. So, I mean, will intelligent design continue to buck the trend of this taboo, of the nature of these taboo discussions?
Oh, sure. Try telling 16, 17-year-old that he can't discuss something, that he's hearing about in biology class or hears outside of biology class and brings into it. Intelligence design, I think the scientific community is frustrated because intelligent design simply isn't going away, because life is not getting simpler. The more we know, the more complex life is seen to be. Even in the 15 years since I wrote Darwin's Black Box, a lot more has been discovered about how the cell works. And systems, sophisticated, complex systems, have been discovered that we didn't even know about 15 years ago, and that we know now life could not exist without these systems. And there seems to be no end to the complexity. The more complex and the more functional it is, of course, the stronger that supports intelligent design, and the less likely it makes a Darwinian explanation.
Now, I want to come a little closer to home here, about an hour from our home base here in Overland Park, over in Topeka, Kansas. Just a few years ago, our pastor was interviewed on international, national affiliates. You were here in Topeka for the Kansas Science Hearings. For those who aren't as acquainted with why those hearings were necessary, why were they necessary, and what was the outcome of those hearings and others like them?
Well, as I understand it, and a few years diminishes my memory. But the Kansas State Education Establishment had decided to define science in a peculiar way. They said that they were going to define science as the search for natural explanations for natural phenomena. And you think to yourself, well, hey, natural explanations for natural, okay, that sounds reasonable. But what it does is it smuggles in, by definition or by wordplay, something like Darwinian evolution. Darwinian evolution has to be true by that definition. If you say that that mind is not natural, that the only things that's natural are natural laws and chance and so on, then something like a Darwinian explanation for life has to be true. The beginning of life, the origin of life, simply had to occur by undirected processes, because that's the definition of a scientific explanation. And the Kansas School Board then had a majority which was not in sympathy with this definition, more in sympathy with an open discussion of this question. And they changed the definition to science is the search for logical explanations to explain the data, which you'd think is okay too. But the scientific community was very upset about this, and there was a big brouhaha, and it was decided that there would be a debate, or the best spokesman for either side would be invited to Kansas to make the case. And the intelligent design proponents said, well, sure, we'll come and explain what we mean by this. And but the scientific establishment, turned up their noses and said, we are the experts. We're not going to go there and talk with these people who are clearly inferior to us. And so they didn't. But the intelligent design folks still came, including myself, Steve Meyer, and Jonathan Wells, a number of people. And we gave testimony, and the rules said that we were allowed to be interrogated by a lawyer for the other side of the school board. And I don't know if anybody in the audience has ever been interrogated by lawyers, but it's no fun at all. And you should take a trip to the dentist, over that any time. But anyway, and the rules said that the lawyer at the end would then be interrogated by the lawyer for our side, for the side that wanted a more open definition. And after it was all over, he simply said, well, no, I'm not going to answer any of your questions. So they cheated. They reneged. They got to grill people on our side, expose people, if you've seen Expelled, to be in a public arena and identified as an intelligent design proponent. They got to expose people as proponents of ID, and a lot of people had severe career repercussions because of that. And it just showed the desperation, I thought, of the other side. I mean, if you have such a strong theory, why not just go up and explain it to people? And clearly people get it, and you'll be the better for it. But they didn't want to play that way.
Wow, certainly have a healthy dialogue. Well, thank you for that explanation. Can you just explain for us your relationship with another intelligent design proponent, Philip Johnston? And can you also talk to our audience about the founding historically of the intelligent design movement? Who were the key architects? Of course, you and others. Who are the key players? What brought you all together? And what is the ongoing exciting research that perhaps is happening today going forward in the ID movement?
Well, how long do I have, 15 seconds or 20?
Take your time. This is very interesting, so take your time.
Okay. Well, Phil Johnston. Phil Johnston is an emeritus professor of law at the University of California, Berkeley. He's been retired maybe 10 years now. But he's what we'd call the father of the intelligent design movement, because Phil is a lawyer, but he understands the logic behind arguments. That's what lawyers do. They try to dissect logic behind arguments in various disciplines. And Philip Johnston took a sabbatical in England and came to read two books. One, Richard Dawkins' The Blind Watchmaker, which made a strong case for Darwinian evolution, and another book called Evolution, Theory, and Crisis by a man named Michael Denton, who was an Australian geneticist, and who was not an intelligent design advocate. He didn't have a counter proposal, but he pointed out all the problems that Darwinian theory had in his view, and he was tired of listening to Darwinists claim so much for their theory. And Philip Johnston was delighted when he read these books, because here are two scientists strongly advocating that the evidence points in opposite directions. You know, how can the evidence completely support Darwinian theory if another scientist says, look, the evidence, points to the opposite of Darwinian theory? And so from that moment on, Phil became very interested in the argument over evolution. And in the very best sense, Phil is a schmoozer. He likes people. He likes to talk to people and gather people together and chew over things. And so he gathered a group around him of like-minded academics, Steve Meyer and Bill Dembski, and people who are currently active in the.
And what year would this have been? Not to interrupt you.
Yes, this was about I'd say 1992, 93. And so those were the early beginnings. And it turns out, when we all got to know each other, that a number of us had read Denton's book and were kind of shocked by it. A number of us had been what you might call theistic evolutionists, thought that we believed in God, but evolution was the way that he got life together on Earth. And but that kind of jolted us out of our complacency. And once you have a community, it turns out that you feel like you're stronger because you can bounce ideas off each other and you can see that your ideas make sense. If you're just a single person, you don't know whether you're crazy or, how can you speak against the whole world, But because of Phil, we all got together and were able to see that we had something to say that other people didn't. And I guess the next book in the parade of books that came out of Phil's series of meetings with people was my Darwin's Black Box in '95, and then William Dembski published a design inference in '97 or '98, which was published by Cambridge University Press, a very prestigious academic publishing house, on the theoretical basis of inferring design. And Jonathan Wells published something called Icons of Evolution, showing that the very examples that Darwinists always point to in textbooks as shining examples of evolution are at best problematic, and some of them are downright wrong. The intelligent design movement started to gather steam then. And the news media started to notice because these books were being published by secular presses. My book was published by a New York publisher, Free Press. It's part of Simon & Schuster, and Bill's book was published by Cambridge University Press, and so on. So it wasn't just a religious publishing house which could be dismissed by the secular press. So we we were really gathering steam in those days, and we continue to do so. We've had our setbacks and our victories, but again, the exciting thing is that it doesn't depend on me. It doesn't depend on Phil Johnston or anybody else. It depends on the data, and the data coming out are, if you look at it with an open mind, it's a slam dunk. There's just no way that a random process can explain this, and the intelligence behind the systems of life is just overpowering. And scientists who don't want to believe in intelligent design really oftentimes admit that they have to struggle with themselves to make themselves believe that this just happened by chance. So it all started kind of serendipitously, but it's now, I think, it's got its own momentum and will carry into the future without stopping.
What about those, you just finished this incredible tour of the United Kingdom, and I wanted to ask you because in Oxford, I thought your presentation was tremendous. You went all over the United Kingdom. You went to Ireland. What was your personal take on the response? Have the professors in the United Kingdom that you can say with our audience jumped on board with the intelligent design arguments in favor of? What was your perspective on your tour of the United Kingdom? I know you went to Cambridge, Oxford, and the rest, so I'd like to hear your perspective on it.
Well, it was wonderful. I thought it was just great. Each place I went, there were, overflow audiences. And it's not because they wanted to see me. I'm good looking, I know, but it's the subject is a fascinating subject, intelligent design, and each time we had great questions after my lecture. I give a pretty standard lecture based on my books and so on, and there were great questions. And it was all held in a very collegial style, no acrimony or very, very little acrimony. We could discuss these things, and even the people who went home disagreeing at least saw that this could be discussed in a friendly manner. There are serious arguments for this, and that maybe they should think a little bit more about it. There were people there from the other side, people, still like Republicans and Democrats who want to keep an eye on what the other guys are doing. So there were folks from the other side, and they came and asked their questions. And it never ceases to astound me what they think will be a devastating question, and it turns out to be, some softball question like who designed the designer, or what about this problem of evil after all? And it's never the science. It's most often a philosophical or theological question. So it was a big success, and I'm glad to see intelligent design taking root in England, because for a long time English felt superior, that this was just these yokels in America who are so unsophisticated, and they were much more sophisticated than we are. But now they're seeing that there really is a scientific dispute, and it's nice to see the discussion spread there.
It certainly is, and one thing I enjoy about at least the few doctoral seminars I've conducted up to this point, it seems in England they're a little bit more respectful, even in the manner they ask questions. They don't attack the person like many Americans do in the way they ask the question. So I know you did a great job. Thank you for coming to the United Kingdom and being willing to do that. I have just 2 questions left, and again, here at Christian Thinkers Society, we're so thankful for you, Professor Behe, taking this time. I was recently asked a question. We ask questions hot on the spot here at our sessions. They can text their questions in to me. And I was asked how early we should begin teaching these certain, what we would refer to as apologetic truths to our children, and specifically relating to creation, intelligent design, and I said as early as possible. You know, Audrey and I, my wife and I, we regularly take our daughter, Lily Faith, to the park, and I said, you can pick up a leaf, and you can point out the fact that the intricate design of the leaf and how it converts the sunlight to glucose and the incredible design it took to produce that leaf, and just how amazing it is. And I know with you and your expertise of intelligent design and what you've seen, what you've seen in the evidence, can you just give some common everyday examples of intelligent design for our audience that we can use in the workplace, that we can use in the classroom, that we can take home with us tonight, and just to have in our back pocket for when people ask, you know, why do you believe in intelligent design?
Well, gee, I'm a biochemist, so I always go for molecular things. But I would say, I would tell somebody that science has discovered that we are like these creatures on Star Trek. Star Trek, in one of its runs, had some creatures called the Borg, and they were made of half machines and half humanoid. And sometimes it would show a scan of their skin or something, and there were these machines on them, the little nanotechnology, nanomachines. They looked evil. They were made of black metal and so on, but they were machines. And you can tell somebody that science has discovered that we're made from machines as well, that at least the physical basis of our life is mechanical. And just like we know that, you know, machinery is made in our everyday world, there is no reason, save that you don't want it to be true, to withhold the conclusion that design explains this elegant machinery that we found in the cell. And I think the best example of the machinery in the cell is something called a bacterial flagellum, which I speak about in Darwin's Black Box and have written about at other places. And it's really an outboard motor that bacteria use to swim. An outboard motor, you know, on a bacterium. You know, who would have thought it? Nobody would have thought it 50 years ago. Darwin thought the cell was a little piece of jello, protoplasm, and we have discovered that he was wrong. So that's what I would do. And you could also say, well, look at the machinery in our everyday world. Look at, an electric or a beater that you use in a kitchen to, beat some eggs or mix some cake mix. Look at a mousetrap or other machines. And the more sophisticated they are, more complex they are, the more and more difficult it would be to build them step by tiny step with an unconscious, unintelligent process in charge. That's what I would do.
Because and thank you for that, because doesn't Darwinian evolution claim there's no intelligence behind the evolution?
If you ask, they'll say, who knows, maybe there is intelligence beyond the universe, but we don't need it to explain what we have discovered in the world.
Okay.
And so they'll waffle about it so that they don't have to prove to you that there is no intelligence, but they'll just say, we don't need it to explain life. But these examples will say, yes, this cannot be explained. If a mousetrap cannot be explained without intelligence, then the machinery of the cell cannot either.
Professor Behe, you're a hero of all of ours here at Christian Thinkers Society. If someone wants to support you, how can they do that? How can we stay in contact with what you're doing?
Okay. Well, they can send checks to my address, which is no, just kidding. I'll just support me. For the theists in the audience, prayers always help. I'm a Christian, and I'm always strengthened to know that people are asking for help for me from God. Beyond that, you can help the ID cause simply by becoming aware of the issues, by writing a letter to the newspaper, letter to the editor, when some article appears, stereotyping intelligent design as some dumb idea. and teach your children, if they're not getting it in school, just, give them a little book, or there's plenty of books out there. Give them a little book that explains, why we think life is designed, that it's not some fideistic conclusion. There's reasons, and as a matter of fact, compelling reasons to think so. So do that, and you'll be doing a lot for the cause.
And along those lines, is there any websites? What are the best information for our audience that they can go to? Because I'm sure that they're going to have a lot more information they're going to want that you would personally recommend.
Sure. Yeah, there's a number of websites. A very good one is on the Discovery Institute, and it's actually the address is www.crsc.org, and the CRSC stands for the Center for Renewal of Science and Culture. It's not a really, doesn't trip off your tongue, but if you forget what it is, just type in Discovery Institute and you'll be able to find it with a search engine. Another one is called Uncommon Descent, which is run by the intelligent design proponent William Dembski, and they have many wonderful discussions and articles and so on there. Another really good one that I like, which is put up by a man who has a young Earth perspective, and that's not my perspective. I'm kind of old Earth, but he's just, he's just like a Renaissance man. He knows about everything. And it's called Creation Evolution Headlines. And I visit it every day just because he summarizes and analyzes so much scientific literature that I find it you can't get along without it.